for coming to Career Conversations, Inclusivity in the Workplace. Today we are joined by three professionals who are working in positions related to EDI, DEI, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we do have a couple questions that we'll get to, and then if anyone in the audience has some questions, we'll have hopefully have some time to answer some of that. So for our panelists, if you would like to introduce yourself with your name, how you identify, your graduation year, your major, and your current position in your current position title and your company, and we'll start with Carrie.
Hello, everyone. I am Carrie Kelly. I am she, her, and you can actually see that I also include the Spanish version of that. I support a team that's also in Mexico and Brazil, so I do keep she, Asia, as one of my pronouns. I graduated Owen and the EMBA program in 2013, and I'm currently the director of DEI for Nissan for US and Canada. So happy to be here today.
And then Reginald, you're next on my little screen.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Reginald Clark. I am the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Director for the law firm Brown Rudnick LLP. I am a double door. I graduated from Vandy twice, once in 2005, indeed, once in 2005 for undergrad, and then I graduated from the law school in 2009. I had a brief stint of trying to start law school at Tulane University in New Orleans, but came right on back and graduated from Vandy. The story behind that is a long one, so I'll spare you all the details about that. But at any rate, I am a native New Yorker. I'm a Posse Foundation scholar as well, so I want to make sure to shout out Posse while I'm on here, and very happy to be with you all this afternoon.
All right, and last but certainly not least.
I assume that's me. I wasn't sure about Ms. Christina. So my name is Raquel Barlow. I am the Assistant Vice President of Diversity Partnerships and Programs at Alliance Bernstein. We're an asset management firm downtown, though we are global and across the domestic country as well. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as an African-American woman, member of the LGBT community. I can run the whole kind of gambit. And I attended Vanderbilt University, specifically Peabody College, and graduated there in 2015 through the HTC program. Very happy to be here.
All right, thank you guys for sharing a little bit about your backgrounds and your experience here at Vanderbilt with the whole double doors. So we're gonna dive right into our first question. And we're not gonna go in any order of who will answer first. So as you come up with an answer, you can feel free to chime in. But in your experience, what are the challenges faced by members of historically underrepresented groups in the workplace?
Okay, I feel like I'm on Jeopardy, or you have to hit the button. So I would say, probably just to give one answer, I would say representation. It's usually, and I guess it kind of leads to the word underrepresented group, right? I think when employees don't see themselves in top positions, it's really difficult to believe that you can fully belong. So I think this is something, especially that's been a huge part of the narrative, especially since the death of George Floyd. We've been able to talk about this very openly across corporate America. And I've spoken with a lot of colleagues in the space, and it's the general topic that most people have to approach. So I would absolutely say representation and leadership.
I feel the Jeopardy experience. It's like double clicking it. So I would follow that up. I would agree with representation. As part of my role, I also work with students specifically, HBCU students, even more specifically. And I have encountered where they may feel just the cultural shift in coming into the workplace and or just maybe their past experience or what they've been exposed to. And they can interpret it often as a deficit when it really truly is just a diversity of thought, diversity of experience. But if they don't have someone there in addition to representation, but really mentorship and support to really translate that for them and advocate for them, I think that there can be some kind of confidence hits when they are truly very much capable. So I just wanted to follow that piece up as well.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what both Carrie and Raquel have said. When you are the only or one of very few in a space, certainly there are questions that folks begin to have about their whether they belong, whether they're prepared, and whether they have not only the confidence but the capabilities and competencies to do well in the space, whatever space they might be working in. But I think in addition to not really having access perhaps to or mechanisms set up for true mentorship or sponsorship, I think often workplaces aren't prepared for the one or two people, right? So a lot of the work that we do is trying not only to make sure that there is space and that there is representation, but that the cultures in the workplaces are fully prepared for folks who of difference once they arrive in these spaces. So what does that mean? That means that we're trying to make sure that the micro inequities or the things that the underrepresented populations might experience in these spaces are minimized or completely, well, that's in the oasis of corporate America, if ever there was one, but completely diminished or reduced when folks arrive in these spaces. We want to make sure that particularly those who are from communities that are really truly underrepresented. I mean, when you're talking about those who are coming from the disabled community, for instance, you want to make sure that they have the appropriate accommodations and that there's space for them to have conversations about their needs. That's the other thing. It should not be on the individual's plate. It's not their responsibility to prepare their workplaces for their arrival. And that's why folks like us exist in these spaces to make sure that the place is well suited for them when they get here and representing their underrepresented community, one or a very few of those people.
I'm going to piggyback again off of that. I love that. And I think a lot of what he said can be kind of summarized in really diminishing those barriers, as you mentioned. So the other piece I just wanted to call out is because we are trying to speak to just across the board underrepresented groups, is that certain groups have a very collectivist culture. And so they will very much speak in we's and we have accomplished this and may even have, a number of folks in their homes whatsoever. And when it goes to get that promotion level, because they speak in we's, because they tend to be very like naturally collaborator team players, they may struggle also with advocating for themselves in that position because they don't want to be perceived as selfish or taking, not necessarily the blame, but the credit for other folks. And so in addition to having that mentorship and that access to have someone to advocate for you, it's also having a promotion process that doesn't fully rely on someone campaigning for themselves. And that's another barrier that can kind of be addressed and identified so that it is a bit more equitable in how that is chosen, because they are likely and often very capable in getting the work done, but they aren't aware, especially in America, with our kind of capitalistic culture and very much networking type of culture, what that relationship orientation and importance of that really means.
And let me just add one thing, because Raquel and Reginald, you both sparked it. I think also just taking advantage of opportunities. Oftentimes people in underrepresented groups make sure that they check off every single box of what's being asked for versus just saying, hey, I know I can do this, and kind of having that confidence to be able to say, this is an area that I can contribute and should be valued in. So actually seizing those opportunities.
Yeah, very much so. Shoot your shot and go to the lunches. It may seem like a very kind invitation, but that is a lot of time where business gets done is outside of the workplace. whether it's the golf course, the fun lunch, the happy hour. So knowing and understanding what's truly being offered to you as well.
Agreed.
All right. So kind of piggybacking off of that, now that we talked about some of those challenges, what are some strategies that you either personally have used to combat those challenges, or that you've seen other people in similar positions use to address those challenges, and how successful were they?
Well, I guess I can start to answer that. I think we probably all are strategists at our various organizations, respective organizations, to kind of do that, answer the question. So I think it's on the individual side, and then it's on the organizational side. So I can speak to perhaps what organizations might do, and then pivot and talk, and we can all talk about some of the things that what individuals can do in these spaces as a member of an underrepresented group. But the organizations obviously need to create certain kinds of pipelines to bring people into the organization, to create a culture and an environment and infrastructure to support them once they are there, which means making sure that they have access to programs like sponsorship and mentorship programs, that other checks and balances within the organization to make sure that they are getting stretch assignments and equal opportunity, and that they're getting good feedback for their growth and improvement. I work at a law firm. Elevation is an incredibly important part of the attorney experience within big law, or just law firms more generally. And so, as you're being elevated throughout the ranks of your organization, there are certain things that you need to accomplish in order to get to each level, making sure that there is, once again, an infrastructure to inform and assist in and creating the space for folks at each level, preparing them for each level as they're escalating and elevating throughout the organization. And so those are some of the things that you might do in terms of infrastructure. You also want to create community. Raquel talked about community being an important part of the way that many members of underrepresented or diverse communities think about themselves and engage within workplaces. And so because of that, you want to provide safe spaces for people to be able to come together, share with one another, and feel like they are part of a community that is part of the broader community within the organization. We've been having a lot more of these conversations, at least in my experience, in not just the law, but in corporate America more generally, about what we should be doing to really make people feel like this is a place where they can belong. Belonging is even now a part of the nomenclature that we use in DEI. Now some folks even add the B, because that is, it's not just about having the bodies in the seat, but making sure that people feel like this is a place where they can do good work, because how you feel actually does influence what you do in your respective workplace. So that's some of the stuff that at a very, very high level, we think about when we're coming up with strategies for creating environments where people of all kinds, of all walks of life, can have access, equal access to opportunities, and to succeed at the equitable rate.
I can follow it up a bit on the more individual angle of things. I'm a big believer, and I love that you mentioned we're all kind of strategists at our core, or at least, ideally should be and need to be. Join everything. Go to as many things as possible. If you have, as part of your onboarding, they offer to set you up with a buddy or a mentor, get one. It doesn't matter if that fizzles out later, or they abandon you or whatsoever. You never know who knows someone else. And those are often how those doors are created. So if they have various company events, try to go to those, even if they're virtual. If you have an intranet, we call ours the loop. Look these folks up, see what they're doing, see if it ties to what you're interested in. So much of this is truly about making those connections. And so you have to put yourself in the position to make those connections, even as they are kind of shifting those barriers and such. We have employee resource groups. I believe Nissan does have them as well. I'm not sure about the law firm, but they are essentially, we call them ERGs. Folks may call them affinity groups, BRGs, business resource groups. If someone is kind of trying to recruit you, they will generally lead with this in this new age after George Floyd especially. But each of these groups represent different facets of someone's identity, whether it's, your gender or gender expression, LGBT, racial, ethnic minorities, even millennials, which will soon need to become Gen Zs. I think folks are going the young professional route just to capture them all and not change names often. But these groups will give you that sense of community, and they will often put you in connection with places that will support you. And that's especially if you relocate to a new state. These folks will often tell you, for example, where to get that haircut. If you need someone to kind of braid your hair, we've leveraged them like that, as well as educating allies about your experience so those conversations will become easier, and connecting you with executive sponsors and that senior representation. So just to kind of summarize kind of quickly, don't take any of those events that people work very hard to create for you for granted, and don't take any of those connections for granted as well.
All right. Renaud, you mentioned the culture of DEI and how belonging is starting to become part of that. So our next question is, how do you know if a company truly values you when you are applying, or even when you're in that position, and you're not just being hired because you check a box on their list? And that's open to anyone.
Well, my immediate response to that is to turn the question, I think, on its head, because I understand the impulse often to enter a space and be skeptical as to the motivations or the genuine nature with which you are being approached or engaged. However, I challenge everyone to enter every room as if you are meant to be there, as if you belong there. And that's a change of mindset, I think, that most people have to go through. I have to do it on a daily basis. I mean, I sit in meetings at times with people, some of the most powerful people, not only at my firm, but at our client organizations. And when I first started doing this work, I had to question often, do I know what I'm talking about? Or like, should I really be in this meeting? I have to change my thinking on a regular basis, and I challenge everyone else to do that, because once you assume that you belong, it changes the ways in which you engage with everyone else. And so because of that, everyone else changes the way, or at least they have space to change the ways in which they engage with you. And so that's my first response, is to try to enter every room assuming that you belong because you have an invitation and you have the seat at which to sit at the table. So don't think that you are thought of as being any less for sitting at that table because you were there. And even if, and we've gone through many cycles around diversity and inclusion and civil rights in this country, even if you are perceived by others perhaps to be an affirmative action hire, or someone who got the job just because, you're still at the table, and you have the ability to show and prove just how capable you really are. And so by living up to your own potential in that space, you can reframe the conversation that anyone else might be having about you, just by doing your best and doing good work. So that's really my initial thinking. In fact, I probably have strayed a bit further away from the actual question because of how passionate I feel about one's own thinking, and how it actually changes the conversations that you might be having. But yeah, that's my initial reaction to your question.
And I want to kind of jump in and answer it from before you get the job, or as you're trying to interview for a position. And I would just say that the interview is actually the time, of course, you are being interviewed, but it's also your time to interview the people that are interviewing you. It's really that time to challenge the organization, and really just kind of be the person that you are, show up as your authentic self in that interview. I think sometimes people, of course you want to put your best foot forward, but I think sometimes people alter their being for that interview, and then they show up on day one and they're like, wait a minute. So I would say be your professional best self that day, so that you know that they are hiring you and not your representative. Ask questions to the hiring manager, see how they respond. And again, you are also interviewing them. And so are they receptive to the questions that you're asking? Are they receptive to your challenge? Are they considering your feedback? And those are things that you can kind of see in that moment. Also, just kind of ask questions about how does that company develop their employees? Are they investing in their employees? And then I would also say, ask current employees. I mean, there are people either that you know that are there, look on Glassdoor, find out information from someone who is not trying to just recruit you, but you kind of want that real story about the company.
Yeah, and I'd love to follow that up from the perspective of kind of similar to like You Belong. I'm a big believer in, while everyone is shifting now to including the words belonging, you still want to very much treat this like a business relationship. People will pose family and they will do their bestest for you to feel like you belong, but you need to operate through the lens of what can I contribute, value add, and what can I leave with, what can I gain? And so I would not, be diminished if for some reason you have the perception as like what you said, an affirmative action or a diverse hire, because you're getting that seat at the table and you will do both them and yourself a disservice not to fulfill that seat and what they're asking for. So the ways that you can determine if this is going to be a value add for you and less about, are they already completing the mission? Because I'll tell you, a majority of corporate America is on a journey just like you all are. They are trying to better improve that, but they're not going to be perfect. So if you go out and try to interview them looking for this, blue skies level of diversity, you may potentially want to look at startups. You may want to potentially look at different locations if that is like the epitome of what you need. But if you have other values to kind of be grown and develop as they develop themselves, you can ask things like, what level of support do you have just in general for new hires or diverse hires? That's usually when they will mention things like employee resource groups. They may have young professional or women's councils, other places where you can generally get some leadership experience amongst your group or identity. What distinguishes me in this role? So make them tell you, outside of you potentially being a diverse hire, why are they interested in you? And that can often help you in terms of confidence level or acumen. What diverse organizations do y'all partner with? A lot of Gen Z and millennials, we're seeing it get started, are very mission oriented in terms of how they choose their work. So make sure that connects to your values. There are some corporations that just may not work. And like she said, you do not want to send a representative. I have been on the interview panels for my honors program long ago, prior to Vanderbilt at another school. And a young lady interviewed amazingly, we would have taken her regardless. And then she showed up the first day. We did this little retreat before they got on campus, and she had about 27 piercings that she had taken out and a giant gun tattoo across her chest. And we were like, hey, it'd be just great if we kind of knew. And also if you had asked to make sure that would like work out for you, and it ended up not being a problem, but just, that was a huge shift from the representative to what we kind of saw. So just do both of you all with service and be authentic as you can while still being professional. And then a few other questions I would tell you all to ask is, what is the career path for this role? So you want to know, okay, great, I'm getting the seat at the table, but does this seat kind of stop here and it can never grow? Probably not your best bet. That's going to end up having you exit out and go to somewhere else where you do have that potential to both learn as well as influence. So happy to, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but happy to shoot a few of these questions to the moderator and others if you want to send that out as well. But being in the recruiting space, I'm a very big believer on just across the board, interview them as well before you sign the dotted line.
If I could just add one more point to that is, since we took it further back to the actual interview phase and before you even land at the organization, I think this is probably implicit in what's already been said, but to say it out loud, please do your homework about the organization before you get there. I mean, of course, be prepared with questions that you might ask canned for every single firm that you or organization that you might want to work with or work for, but certainly make sure that you drill down and learn some of the stuff that you can simply find by going to the website or otherwise doing a Google search and finding news related to the organization. Do your search on LinkedIn about the people that you are known to interview with. These are things that I can't tell you how many times I, as an interviewer, have encountered when I am talking to a candidate who just assumes that it's going to be a one-sided conversation where I'm asking questions and they are meant to answer them, that there is a lack of knowledge about the organization that I work for in the responses to my questions and the questions that they're asking of me about the organization. So although the questions that Raquel and Carrie suggested, I think certainly do allow space for them to tell you about the organization, don't walk in without having without knowing a bunch of the answers to the questions that you are likely going to ask them about the firm or the organization that you're trying to interview with.
Yeah, I consider it almost offensive. We've actually been going through some interviews now, and that is a huge distinguisher. Even if you need a name drop, just the, oh, I saw so-and-so on LinkedIn just accomplished this, that counts as research. Also, the art of sending thank you emails should not be dead, or thank you notes. So feel free to like throw that back in there as well.
You're here.
All right, so we actually had a question from the audience going back to affinity groups. So should affinity groups be avenues for community or institutional / company change, or both?
So I'd be curious, are they asking for themselves or are they asking for the organization? Because I will tell you, especially after George Floyd, something that was often almost generally underfunded, really considered a camaraderie builder and a community support and an educator at best, now it's become an avenue for recruitment and talent acquisition. So they are given KPIs, they give key performance indicators. They are held to a different standard at a lot of places in terms of results and contributions. And I think that is a lot for those leaders, but it's also an opportunity for those members. So now you can be taken to a lot of those recruiting events. If you do choose to be in a leadership position, you're going to get a level of attention. I've seen where a lot of corporations are having that kind of added to people's evaluation. So they're getting some level of recognition to that. They may be able to go on other conferences. They are playing with even paying these type of folks. So I think that organizations, regardless of potentially what the individual thinks, see them as vehicles for change. That being said, I've also seen where some organizations are distinguishing business resource groups or ERGs, employee resource groups, from affinity groups. And so some have two, depending on their size. Where do we have that town hall where it can only be people who identify as that group to discuss an event like the murder of George Floyd and just kind of vent and allow that camaraderie? And where do we have that ERG or BRG where it's allowing us to actually recruit and help and educate others about the African-American population? So that's why you also want to ask them so that they can kind of tell you at what level they are and what do you expect of them is a great follow-up as well.
All right. So moving on to how you balance your work-life identity. So how do you maintain a healthy balance between your work and your personal life, particularly when it relates to your identity?
I'll jump in here. It's really interesting. I became hyper aware of this when I actually moved into the DEI space just prior to the killing of George Floyd. And so, as you can imagine, I think that wasn't the first time something of that magnitude has happened within the African-American community. However, it was my first time actually working in the DEI space where I couldn't shut the switch off. Instead of where I could, before it was, a news story and I had to internalize it, but then I could, again, cut the switch off, go to work and come back home and then, go back into my personal space. There was never that disconnect between work and life. And so I think working in this DEI space, it's really, really critical that we are intentional about stepping away, are intentional about, what information we take in and when, because again, it was constant for weeks, months, actually, at home, at work, everywhere. And it just, that on top of the pandemic, and so I think in this, I reached out to a lot of people within the DEI space at the time. So that, to me, that was one really important thing, because only someone that was also in the space would understand the ability to never have that disconnect. and to create those ways of venting in a way that you couldn't otherwise. I think in the DEI space, we were oftentimes the healers or the informers within the organization, and we never really had the time to take the space and place to heal ourselves. And so it was really important, I think, again, to be very intentional about taking that step back, focusing on myself, whether that was finding peers in the space who I could vent with. Again, taking a break, taking a walk, watching something funny on Netflix that had nothing to do with research about how to respond, about how to create a safe space for others to talk. I had to be intentional again about creating that safe space for myself. So it's hard, but it's necessary.
Yeah, I think every one of us who goes into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space has probably a much higher tolerance than the general population for listening to and helping to strategize with people who are in pain or suffering or who need assistance more generally. It's part of what we do, and I think it's not as understood that is an aspect of our work as I think it ought to be, because in many ways I serve as an ombudsman in my organization. I'm a therapist at times in my organization, and I'm talking about for people who are at the top of the food chain to our legal executive assistants and such. So there are lots of hats that we have to wear doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We are recruiters, we are promoters, we are sponsors and mentors, we are Jacks and Janes of many trades, and yet I think what is often forgotten is that we too are professionals who are thinking about our own well-being and are thinking about and have to cater to our own interests and needs. And so I think that's one of the things that is lost on many folks. They think what we do is fluff until they start to see the KPIs or the return on the investment of us being at our organizations. And so I personally, similar to Carrie, really had to find the ways to shut down and turn off and respect my own boundaries, because if I didn't, other people would not. I think no matter what role you play within your work, whether you're doing the work that we do or otherwise, you must create boundaries for yourself. And that's something that I am saying even to lawyers, and in the legal profession, it's one that folks tend to have fewer boundaries than they ought to. And so reminding people that they must carve out within reason their own boundaries and be able to be faithful to them when challenged. That does not mean that you can tell your boss that you are only going to be available from 11 to 3 every day, and that on Fridays you have a standing appointment with your spiritual counselor from 11 to 4. That is not what I mean. What I mean is that you understand the culture within which you work, and you understand the both written and unwritten rules about the organization, and based upon that, make a judgment call about what is appropriate for that space. And then when those boundaries are questioned or challenged, or you're called upon to do things that not only feel uncomfortable, but that are unsafe for you, whatever that may mean, then you have to be faithful to who you are and what those boundaries really are, and check in with yourself. That's really the only thing I would add to what Carrie has said, because it is what we do really is about that. But honestly, it's part of who we are, I think, all of us who enter this space. And so we have a much higher tolerance for that. But at the end of the day, it's something that every professional must do.
And I'm just going to give one more specific example outside of the boundaries and the self-care, which truly start those coping mechanisms now. They will serve you throughout life. Just because I feel like these upcoming generations are especially in tune with social media, a boundary to maintain is I do not accept anybody that I work with on any of my social medias. Once I leave this organization, I don't decline them either. I leave them right there in stasis, so they know, like, I saw it, and I'm gonna leave you right there. But as soon as I leave that organization, except for, oh, come on, let's be the best of friends. But there may be times, when you get in this org and it does get very stressful and you want to go on a vacation, and they don't need to know what you're doing on vacation, even on your day-to-day and your weekends. They don't need to know. Even if you are the best of friends, I highly encourage you not to do it. I also encourage you not to follow company things on your personal page, because by just convenience, they always want to follow you back. So if you do want to follow and stay in tune to your company's Instagrams, Facebooks, etc., have a separate page for that. I know that on a lot of these social medias now you can toggle profiles, but that way you can still be in tune with this. I have worked at various organizations where maybe the folks that we serve and call clientele can be very forthright with their opinions, especially during the times of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, et cetera. And if I was following that on my personal page, that did not allow for a boundary to be set. And like they said, it is a lot. It was a lot to be the healer when everyone felt they need to be healed, and rightfully so, understandably so. And to see some of the comments when you're trying to do the work to further people's mindsets, and those who are just not going to be brought along on that journey still have a voice and opinion, is very trying. It will wear on you. And so you have to understand where to shut that off, but really not to even create those pipelines and that access in the first place is one of the easiest ways. So either have separate social media profiles to follow any of that company specific information, or just do not allow them to have access to you outside of that work time. I'm gonna call that out.
Thank you. So kind of on the lines of that balance aspect, so how do you, besides maybe affinity groups, but how can you find and create a support system that you can trust in different companies?
I can start on that one. I was taught from a very young professional age that I needed to have a board of directors. If I considered myself a company, every company has leadership. It may have a CEO, but the CEO has advisors. They have people who in most instances, they're beholden to, but the board of directors that you have for your own professional path is there to advise you on the decisions that you are making along the way. And this is not just a mentor or someone who can, cheer you on or help you feel better. These are people who are going to critically assess the options that are available to you and help you really strategize on your next step, 5 steps down the road. And so cultivating that board of directors means seeking out people not only within your organization, but most importantly, outside of your organization, who can tell you about the appropriate ways, or help you figure out the appropriate ways to handle the things that you will encounter as you're going along your professional journey. So that's the first thing that I would say is cultivate along the way your board of directors. And for me, there are people who have stayed on my board of directors since day one, and there are people who have cycled on and off. And that's fine. For a number of reasons. Your career is going to change, and so the need for those people may change. That doesn't mean you should no longer consider them contacts, because every contact you make is going to be an important one. There are people who may not be on my board of directors, but folks that I worked with literally 15, 20 years ago when I was an intern at Lehman Brothers. If you don't know what Lehman Brothers is, just Google it. Even if you go back that far, there are people I've known for that long who are still very important professional contacts for me, but they aren't necessarily people that I look to for advice. It's that board of directors that you look to engage, maybe even on more than one occasion, to really help you strategize on your next steps and what you should be doing and when you're encountering any given issue or concern at work.
I'm a big person about semantics, so I always just want to qualify the word trust as well. And so you do not want to approach how you choose your board of directors. I love that phrasing, like you're getting another parent. It is very important to let people know their roles and their lanes. And so everything is not a trust fall. You can trust someone who is a subject matter expert in this place to be on that and give you advice on that. It doesn't mean that you need to run every aspect of your life and every decision that you're considering around them, because they're not experts in that. They may not have walked the same path. The other piece I wanted to call out, diversity of thought. So yes, both internally and externally from the organization. But Franklin Covey does a very neat activity. And if you don't know them, I'm gonna do the Lehman Brothers thing, Google them, Franklin Covey, where it's called a network audit. And oftentimes we would gravitate and have a homogenous network, meaning that they're gonna look very similar in some facet of our identity to us. And that is great. And that's gonna make you feel like really supported, but do not dismiss people who are starkly different from you so that you can understand maybe the perspective of client that you will need to reach and speak to, or also just to get a different perspective in general. And so they kind of run through, and I encourage you all to do this. Think of the 10 people that you would go to if you have an issue, and then write down what are those identities, what's their age group, what's their gender expression, sexual orientation, racial, ethnic, etc., and see how many of those are similar to you and how many are different. And then, I'm not saying show up at some odd group and be like, I need one of those, but really think about how can I start to diversify and get into different environments where they're going to have that diversity and craft those authentic relationships so that you can be broadening your perspective as well.
And I'll just take the rear on this one because my answer is exactly identical to the response of both Raquel's and Renaud. So the only thing I want to clarify is, again, around trust. And so it's important, especially as you're picking internal mentors or people that you trust internal to your company. Someone who's your peer or your friend today could be your boss tomorrow. And so I think just to kind of piggyback on the concept of trust, it's really critical that you're intentional about those relationships and the information that you're sharing. And I also say board of directors. So it's really key to just kind of keep people very specific and intentional about the value that you're bringing to them and that they are also bringing to you. And just be mindful of those lines so that you're not crossing them.
And sorry to also just jump back in because I thought you summarized so well. I have a mentor who is very near and dear to my heart, and he tells me constantly, and I used to work with him, don't trust anyone. He doesn't say that to be very negative, but it's less about other people's character, and you never know what position someone else will be put in where they have to choose serving you over maybe themselves, their family, any of these other things. And you may not always be in that room when they have to make that decision. So in order to just not put people in that place, that difficult place, and put yourself potentially at risk, be very intentional about the information and what you trust, because I have had friends who ended up, when I moved on, they got the job that I had, or I recommended them for the job that I had. And there are going to be times where you can socially overlook things, and maybe you're like, do I want to attach my name to them? But there may be times where you don't have that chance. So just being very intentional about the information you share, and knowing if it's someone's lane that, hey, that's where I can have the emotional breakdown or vulnerability with, potentially choose that one outside of the organization, potentially choose that one on more of a familial level, or even an age difference where there can't be a threat there, because you cannot tell the future. We didn't see this pandemic coming, so just be very intentional.
I just to jump back in, I think the word trust is such an important and often misconstrued or misunderstood word in the context of work. I've learned that in my own career, a lesson around trust more than once. But the one thing that I think is really important as well is not just whether and how much you trust the people with whom you work, but that they trust you. And trust between coworkers is built in a lot of different ways. I think we have to have emotional intelligence enough to discover and understand the people that we work with, so that we know what it means to work with that person and how they value us, and vice versa. But I discovered in one job that they needed to trust me. In order for them to trust me, I needed to share bits of information with myself. I needed to really be more honest and open, authentic. I think Raquel and Carrie might agree that often people from diverse backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds often enter the workplace not just skeptical, but because they're skeptical, they enter it with armor on. And so because they have that armor, they aren't very open about themselves, particularly people from the LGBTQ plus community. They don't really talk about the things that their coworkers talk about at work. My wife and kids, my husband and kids, you know, the things that we did on the weekend. Our weekends often look very different. And the things that we do, we don't want to often discuss at work because perhaps it might not be workplace appropriate. Many of the things that people talk about at work are not appropriate, but we just don't feel comfortable and don't trust our coworkers. But what I discovered is we have to talk about balance. There needs to be a balance between what you protect about yourself and what you're willing to divulge and be open about. Because if there are people who are genuinely interested in getting to know and learn more about you and actually work with you and trust you, there won't be space for their trust if you aren't opening yourself up to that. And so I totally agree. You must be discerning about what information you share. Be discriminating about how much you divulge and with whom you divulge it or to whom you divulge it, but certainly be open enough to share. And that's not easy for everybody. I can tell you that's not easy for me. It's not my default, but it's a muscle that needs to be exercised, I think, in the workplace, particularly for people who might be the different one, the person who is entering a space that as an underrepresented person or from an underrepresented population, you have to be able to be open and more trusting perhaps than the people sometimes that you work with or around in order for that trust to be built, the sufficient amount of trust to be built in order for you to be successful in that workplace.
Just to try to make that slightly more like concrete, and I thought you did amazing, but just in case, because you all may not have been in the spaces, anytime you're speaking with folks, think about how can I show them that I connect with them. And so if you've ever had someone, come to you kind of mortified that something happened to them, and you have this inclination to say, like, let me tell you about this time I also embarrassed myself. It happens to everyone. You can very much kind of use that as an emotional compass of, if someone's telling me about their favorite team and they want to yell Roll Tide, and maybe I'm not into sports, let me also tell them something about what I love or a hobby of mine to show, like, hey, I don't just live at the office. So just thinking of what they're telling me can I have a similarity to, and piecemeal that type of information out, and where am I, like, for the oversharers out there, where do I do too much kind of thing, and you will start to kind of craft that response and those parameters to allow yourself to feel that safety, but also that connection.
Awesome, thank you. So I do want to let the students in the audience know that if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But kind of besides student questions, kind of like a closing question for you three is, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for a college student that is preparing to enter the job market based around current experiences and current trends in the industry?
I mean, I feel like I've talked a lot. So Carrie, I see you ready. Okay. So I don't mind going.
All right, I'll go. So I would first of all say network, especially as a student. I think you'll find that alum are more than happy to connect with you, to help. And the great part is now that you have a tool that you don't even have to know who people are. You just search for Vanderbilt and you're going to find a lot of people that are going to pop up in your field of interest, whatever that might be, on LinkedIn. So use LinkedIn as your friend, message people, set up virtual meetings, whatever it might be. The network is so critical, so important, and you never know what might come out of that, whether that's an internship, a mentor, just a conversation that could be so valuable to help you along your career. So again, networking is important, reaching out to alumni, leveraging LinkedIn. Because again, like I said, people are usually interested in helping students. And I think the one thing as I talk to students that I hear as the typical concern is, ending that college career, so to speak, in a pandemic, where a lot of it is virtual, a lot of interviewing is happening in a virtual aspect. And I would just say, don't be afraid of it, lean into it. You all are probably even better experienced at it, having gone through school or having, transitioned into a phase of life through the pandemic, lean into it, see it as a strength, and just, again, own your confidence in that space. But that's what I usually hear from students is, oh, it's a pandemic, I'm tired of Zoom, which we all are tired of Zoom. But again, just lean into it, use your resources, and believe in yourself, honestly. You've accomplished so much, and people really see that you've overcome a lot in a short period of time.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the most tenacious generations, boy, I tell you. So I often, and when I do these type of presentations, I liken the job search and really all throughout corporate America, even once you have the job, to dating. And so there was a question that we kind of floated, it didn't come up, about including diverse organizations on a resume or a LinkedIn. I am a full believer in this, because just like you're swiping through all these dating profiles and you want to know people's interests, they want to know your interests as well. But getting into that, diversity hire or diversity of thought, as a recruiter, I say, oh man, they're the president of their investment club. That's a network I can tap into if we hire that person. So that's showing your reach and your connection. That's a value add. And also, because people are getting into a space where they want to create that diversity, but they may not already have it. They also may not have your photos. They may not have access to your LinkedIn, and they don't want to get to a place where they're going to be biased and see too much information. Having those diverse organizations is going to allow them indicators. If you're part of some Greek organization, Divine Nine, that is helpful. They can potentially assume, but assume to your benefit. So definitely build out the LinkedIn and the resume with those diverse organizations. And then also, similar to dating, I think we all want that perfect person in perfect place. What you usually end up with is a work in progress. And so you really need to approach the job search with, hey, you're going to have a work in progress. And what are my red flags? I'm not going to deal with it. And what am I willing to go along with them in this journey and see them and allow them to grow? So do not come to interviews with various organizations and be like, well, you didn't have X, Y, and Z, and those aren't necessarily your red flags or your, non-negotiables. So I can't be with y'all, because what is that organization going to be like in 5 years? And do you want to be a part of that journey? And do you want to be that access and that support to someone else that you can help bring in? So I would just say, keep those kind of two facets in mind. And like she said, you all are very accomplished. Doors will be open for you. Just be ready to take full advantage to that opportunity. And don't think you need to have everything on a job description, because people here are human creating those. I don't create them, but other people. And they are also looking for this perfect person when they need to accept a work in progress. So if you got 60% of it, shoot your shot, I promise you. And if you make and establish that rapport with your recruiter, they are an advocate for you. Tell them things, tell them what you're looking for, and know that they are, if you maintain that respectful relationship, advocating for you behind closed doors as well. So don't count yourself out.
Yeah, well put by both Carrie and Raquel. The only thing that I would say that I'm responding to that both of them have said is, Carrie talked about networking and the importance of networking, utilizing with your pre-existing networks and bringing them with you to your organization. Be consistent as you are networking. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to get an email from, or even invest time in having a meeting with someone who might be more junior, interested in what I do. And then 2 months after I have had a phone call from them or had that meeting, they have dropped off the radar, never to be heard from again. Or if I reach back out to check on them, that I don't hear anything back. That indicates that, talk about dating, you are ghosting someone who is a potential long-term contact for your professional life. That is not a smart thing to do. People move companies, people ascend and get higher positions, and you never know, as Raquel said a moment ago, who knows whom. And so, like every relationship that you start, be prepared to follow through and remain consistent with that relationship. What does that mean? Making a calendar. I have a calendar that I set on Outlook, little alerts that every 3 months, there are certain people that I need to check in on. Every 6 months, certain people that I check in on. There are people that I make notes about. Ooh, I know I just read an article that this lawyer at this firm did this. I want to celebrate them on LinkedIn. I'll send them an email or a text message or a LinkedIn message to say, hey, saw that you did this. Congratulations. So happy for you. Let's grab tea or drinks or whatever when you're able. You know, that kind of stuff makes people feel wanted. It makes them feel even more interested in investing in you for the long term. So and networks are just like the relationships that you have with your friends, romantic relationships, and your family. They have to be invested in and cultivated. Prune them, of course, when you need to get rid of them. Learn how to cut some people out, but understand that every relationship that you start professionally should be treated in the very same way. Be consistent. That's really the one thing that I want people to understand.
All right.
I was gonna say, so sorry. I'm just gonna say, do not badmouth your ex or your previous, organization in that, because again, you don't know who knows who. So, learn the art of a positive reframe. Hey, they're still growing, and I understand the organization is going through changes. I just think you all may be a better fit, as opposed to they did X, Y, and Z. So, just wanted to share that a little bit.
Especially in the context of interviews. Going into an interview and talking about your current or former employer negatively is always a no-no. Even if it was a bad experience that you had there and you're leaving there under unceremonious circumstances, learn how to, as was said, reframe your experience there and what you learned from the circumstance as opposed to what you endured while you were there. I can't tell you how much of a positive signal that sends, even to especially the person with whom you're interviewing who knows about the circumstances under which you're interviewing for this new job. I can't tell you how important that is. We can probably do a whole session on that alone. But yeah, that's a great point, Raquel.
Thank you. And it just matters because they wouldn't want you to put their dirty laundry out if they, again, are learning and going through some things or just are a negative place. So you're demonstrating to them that you can, show that maturity and that, distinction.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Carrie, Raquel, and Reginald for spending the hour with us, discussing your experiences and providing a lot of insightful advice to the current Vanderbilt students. Like we said at the beginning, this is going to be recorded and put on our Doorways page as well as on the YouTube channel. But again, I just want to thank you three for spending some time this afternoon with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Go Doors.
Go Doors.